Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode, the 350th episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. In today's episode, I wanted to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned over the last 7 years. It's 7 years I've been doing this podcast, and I have not missed a week. There has been an episode that has come out each and every week over that entire stage. But instead of talking to you about what I've learned during this period here, I wanted to share with you there's a parallel journey that's been happening along with the podcast, and that has been in Community Influencer, which is a group coaching program that was initially started off to help chiropractors just with their marketing. And then as it grew through there, I realized that for many of the members inside, that wasn't a marketing problem they had. It was a retention problem, a conversion problem. And for others, what they needed was systems and leadership. And so there are really three parts and three conversations that we have regularly throughout Community Influencer. They are in around messaging and broadcast, that's marketing, retention and conversion, and then systems and leadership as well. Now, throughout this time, I've had the pleasure of working very, very closely with hundreds of chiropractic practices from around the world. Singapore and Australia and New Zealand, Canada, right throughout Europe, and of course, mainland USA as well. So there are things in common with chiropractors that are really thriving in their life and their practice. And I've spent the last 2 days really thinking, really contemplating about that. And I want to share 10 of those with the intent of allowing you maybe to do a little bit of an audit as well to see, one, where am I doing really great? And where is there an opportunity for me in 2024 to perhaps add a little bit more thriving into my life and practice? So let's dive in. First thing I noticed is that chiropractors who are thriving in their life, they tend to implement really quickly. They take action and they get stuff done. I was made aware of a social experiment recently that was looking at different pathways through to mastery. And the avenue which they ran this social experiment was in a photography class, and they were looking to see different ways what would lead to the best photographs being taken. So they all had the same kind of lessons that they went through, but the class was broken into two groups. And one class was told, listen, you're going to be examined on the quality of one photograph. You're to submit one photograph at the end of the semester. And the other group was said, listen, there's two things you've got to do. You've got to submit 20 photographs each and every week, and at the end of this, we will choose one as your masterpiece as well. So it gets to the end of the semester and they're looking at who was able to produce the best photographs. Now, not surprisingly, certainly to me, the group that produced the best photographs were the ones that also had to take 20 photographs each and every week. Now, there is a misunderstanding from many of us about what the pathway to mastery is, but what I've come to realize is the pathway to mastery is just through repetition. If you want to get better at something this year, just do it a lot. And in the process of doing it a lot, you will learn and you'll develop skills along the way. Now, part of this implementation, I have to be really clear about this when I'm talking to Community Influencer members. I like to kind of clarify or break down two different sorts of action, because there's something that I call passive action. Now, passive action is the learning phase of things. Now, I've got so much content in there. People can watch videos in around new patient consults and videos into how to put a video together and social media metrics, all those kind of things. And when we're watching those, we're learning. It's very exciting, okay? And dopamine is firing off. We're imagining ourselves doing these things, and so we feel really good about it there too. But this sort of passive action will never grow your practice. This sort of passive action will never get you healthier. It'll never improve your relationships until you move into what I refer to as dynamic action. That is actually getting things done. Now, you know the difference between passive action and dynamic action, because dynamic action is the one where there is risk of failure and rejection. When you're in the learning phase, there is no risk of failure and rejection, but it's not until you start to implement that initial consultation. It's not until you put your first video out there. It's not until you run your first team meeting that you start to risk this as well. So they implement quickly, but they move very quickly from the learning phase into the doing phase. Now, in order to do this, I want to share the second characteristic that they have in common here, and that is they let go of perfection. Now, one of my mantras that I'm talking about all the time is that B- work will make you rich. Now, I learned this from the great book, Brooke Castillo. She's a wonderful life coach. She was a very helpful business coach for me in the early days here. And many of us can use perfection. So first of all, we can use perfection as a crutch that stops us from actually implementing. So it's a nice way of saying, listen, I just want this video to be perfect before I put it out there because I'm all about really high quality work. And this can be a nice excuse that prevents you from actually getting out there and risking failure and rejection as well. Now, some of you are actual perfectionists, and it's not a crutch as well, but this means that your work takes so long to get out there that you're really minimizing the impact that you're having. And I want to encourage you to let go of this, okay? Now, still to this day, the video of mine that has the most views, I think it probably has well over 1 million views on YouTube now, was a video that I shot in the early days in my office at home. I just used the webcam on my computer. I used the microphone on my computer as well. So I didn't have any of the fancy cameras that I have at the moment or microphones. My office is really poorly lit. My office is really messy. I've got my whiteboard on the back there with a lot of my goals and stuff on it that's irrelevant and probably distracting as well. And still, this video just took off. Now, the only thing that this video had with it is it had a valuable solution-focused content, okay? The message I shared in it was fantastic. And now, if I wanted to be a perfectionist about this, I would have wanted to shoot it with fancy cameras and all those bits and pieces. But what I just did is I had an idea come to my mind and I implemented quickly. My focus was B- work as well. Now, the challenge with this is that when we're looking at content, and even if you're looking at some of my videos and maybe you see a big microphone there or, fancy 2 camera angles, those type of things, that is absolutely not where I started. I started with a web camera and no microphone and no lighting and any of those things. And so what happens is the quality of our B- work continues. So this is B- work for me now. Sometimes I still get frustrated about wanting it to be better. But the goal here is for me to actually publish and push forwards. And so we have to let go of perfection. And the community influencer members, the chiropractors that do that well, but still keep that B- standard, are the ones that do really well. They thrive throughout their practice and their personal lives as well. Now, in order to be able to pull that off there as well, they need to have a resilience to failure. And this is the third characteristic that I really notice in those people that are doing really great as well. This is the ability to not be paralyzed by a failure. And they do it by changing their relationship to failure. So many of us, myself at different times as well here, will see, first of all, that failure is personal. It's about me. So if no one signed up for care this week, if you had a video that no one watched, if you did a workshop that fell flat, whatever it is there, we make these failures about us. We make them very personal about our level of worthiness, a level of lovability as well. And we make these events final, which means that's it. If that workshop didn't work, then I'll never be able to do workshops. If that video didn't get any views, then I'll never be able to make a video that has views, so on and so forth. Now, what this means is that because we make it personal and because we make it final, it really paralyzes. Now, there is a different way that we can think about failure. And I noticed certainly the community influencer members that see failure as just an opportunity to learn something new don't become paralyzed about it. So it's not about them. So if someone doesn't sign up for care, then maybe they'll go, well, perhaps that's person, or maybe I need to improve the way that I'm communicating. The video doesn't get any views there as well. They look at maybe why that didn't happen. They'll get some feedback on it. If the workshop didn't go as planned, they will look for an opportunity to learn something from it, okay? So seeing failure as final and personal versus seeing failure as an opportunity to learn something new is the difference between resistance from failure or being paralyzed by failure. Now, this might sound overly simple, and the truth is, it absolutely is. Changing your relationship to failure is really as simple as changing your story in around failure. We're going to talk about stories a little bit later on when we talk about self-awareness. But what is the story that you have with failure? And if you have an overarching fear of rejection and things like that as well, then maybe you want to change the story in around failure. Now, this doesn't mean, because I'm failing often as well, it doesn't mean that I'm not disappointed by it. I put a lot of effort and energy into some episode. Well, I put into all episodes, but a lot of my content and things that I do. And sometimes they fall flat on their face. And I feel disappointed by that. But I just don't let it paralyze me. I don't let it mean anything about me personally. And I don't let it mean final as well, that I can't learn from it. The fourth characteristic that I've noticed is that they're really open to feedback, okay? So if I'm going to learn something new from the video that I created, I have to be open to feedback. And that feedback might be, Angus, you're terrible on camera, or it might be that you did that initial consultation, you didn't connect with the person, you didn't listen. So I have to be open to feedback, which means I need to be coachable. It still never ceases to amaze me how many people pay me, I give them advice, and then what they do is they fight for their inadequacies. They tell me all the reasons they can't do this. Now, instead of being open, instead of being coachable and looking for different options there, they want to fight for the smallest part of them. Now, I'm, as a coach there too, want to fight for what's great about them, and I want to encourage you to do the same thing. If we can see the potential in ourselves, if we can see that we can actually change, if we can be coachable, this is a great way of being able to implement new things. This can be a great way of you making sure that the practice is more thriving this year, and your personal health is too. Now, I really do understand that this does involve a real level of vulnerability, because if we've been doing something for a long time, maybe we've been doing our initial consultation a certain way, for years, it can be hard for us to let go of that. But if we want something different, we have to think something different, and we have to do something different. And this means we need to be really open to feedback. And so maybe, you want to ask yourself now, am I open to feedback? Am I even asking for feedback? Who would I ask for feedback as well? But when people are giving you feedback about what you do as a chiropractor, how you show up as a business owner, how well do you do at taking that on board as well? Now, characteristic number 5 that I notice in common with those community influencer members that are doing really great is they narrow their focus. So nowadays we are open to, we have more access to more information, programs, coaches, approaches than any time in history. Now, if we look at just growing our practice, someone might tell you about corporate talks, in-house workshops, social media, Facebook ads, community events, screenings, internal referrals, Google ads, website SEO. The list could go on and on and on and on. And the problem is the more choice we have, it's not the better that we feel, it's the more likely we are to go into overwhelm, okay? So it's important to remember this, okay? Rarely is there one path to the result that you want, okay? One right path. There's definitely wrong paths, but rarely is there one right path. Now, this in itself means that we can let go of some of the scarcity and the urgency that some people are saying, this is the only way for you to build your practice. It's not. I mean, I've been in enough coaching programs myself, and I've worked with enough chiropractors to know that there are several different ways, several different journeys that we can go to get to the same destination. Now, the one thing in common with people that are able to pull it all off, though, is that they narrow their focus. Now, I'm guilty of this a little bit, because when people come into community influencer, there are a lot of resources for them, okay? They come to a whole buffet of choices, and they get overwhelmed with, where should I start? So one of the things that I do to begin with is we sit down, we have a strategy call, and we go through what is the right next thing. And at maximum, I like to have 3 areas of focus. I had a really great, wonderful chiropractor reach out to me recently, who I've been working with the last few months, who's hitting it out of the park, who just tried to take on too many things. We said, okay, let's bring it back. We've got a website that we need to work on, okay? You do really great with your corporate talks. Let's keep that going. Here's some tweaks to that. And the other thing is, let's get you starting to create some content, and here's it. That's it. For the rest of the year, they're the 3 things that we look at. Now, that focus in terms of what I needed to do, the projects for him there, just turned him into an absolute machine. We let go of all the distraction from there too. It decreased a lot of the stress and the overwhelm, and not surprisingly, started to really knock it out of the park. So narrowing your focus will be one of the things that really begins or really allows you to produce more this year. And our brain will want to tell us that it's the opposite. I need to do more things to get more results, and that is absolutely not the truth as well. Now, in order for us to narrow our focus, in order for us to pull a lot of the things off that we have talked about so far, I want to share with you characteristic number 6, and that is they're prepared to do difficult things. Now, often our journey towards practice growth means that we need to confront the messes of the past. We've put ourselves in situations, messy relationships, messy procedures that we've put in as well, and we need to clean all those up. And this means difficult conversations with ourselves, and often difficult conversations with others, and difficult things to do. I'm using the word difficult a lot because lots of growing a practice can be difficult. Of recent, I've noticed a trend of many chiropractors that I've been speaking to about really lousy relationships that they have got themselves into with staff, both chiropractic assistants, support staff, and associates as well. So many of them have associate relationships where the associates just aren't performing. They're not following through on what the agreements are, but they've built friendships with these people, which makes it really hard to clean up the mess in the past. And sometimes the way that mess needs to be cleaned up is that person needs to be let go. They are not right for you. A lovely young chiropractor who started working with me recently, who just brought on an associate too early. He doesn't have his own house organized first, and he can't go bringing in another person because that person needs attention and focus and new patients and training, and he doesn't have all of those things in a line for himself. Now, is it easy to let a staff person go? I don't find it easy. I've not had to do it a lot of times, but I've certainly had to do it enough. And I think as a healthy human being, if you can do this effortlessly, then good for you. But I know I can't, and I know lots of people don't. But this is part of reminding ourselves what's best, okay? If it's not great for you, in any relationship, if it's not working for both people, it's not working for either of them. This means we need to have difficult conversations. This means we need to do difficult things. And if you're prepared to do more and have more of those in 2024, you'll absolutely take a step closer to that thriving practice and thriving life. Now, one of the key characteristics, next one I want to talk about here, is self-awareness as well. I've spoken about this a lot on the podcast of recently. I talk about it a lot in my coaching. This self-aware people take responsibility for their thoughts, their actions, and for the outcomes they have in their life. Now, one of the keys to achieving self-awareness or being self-aware is to get really good at identifying the stories you're telling yourself and then rewriting those, being the one that's in control of the narrative. Now, I gave you an example of this early on when we talked about failure. We could be self-aware that I have a story in around failure, that it's final, that failure means that I'm not good enough, that I'm not worthy, and that I'm not lovable, okay? And what a self-aware person is able to do is realize that story and then rewrite a new narrative, which is failure is an opportunity for me to learn something new. Now, we have these stories everywhere in our life, and the most damaging stories are the ones that are the hardest to find because we don't think they're a story, we think they are the truth. And I want to give you an example of this. So I had a chiropractor I was talking with just yesterday who was feeling stressed and overwhelmed and anxious because of recent she'd noticed a real downturn in her practice volume. Now, she thought that she was feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed because of what the numbers said. And this would make sense. My numbers are down, therefore I feel stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. But there's a step in between the numbers, which is the data, and the feeling that she was having, and that is the story that she was telling herself. And so after a little bit of investigating and poking and prodding, the story was that I'm not good enough. I can't do this. Other people can do this, but I can't. I'm never going to be able to learn how to do this. I'm not a great chiropractor. And there are different versions in around that. You can imagine the story. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm not meant to be a great chiropractor. These were all the stories that were kind of weaved into it. Now, because of those stories that she was telling herself, that she felt stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and unmotivated and all those things. Now, whenever we have a feeling, the feeling is followed by an action. And the actions in this case here were procrastination there too. She gets on her phone to her mum and she has a whinge and a complain, but she doesn't do anything. And so therefore the result is the numbers stay low. Your stories are a self-fulfilling prophecy, which means it's your stories that create your feelings, it's your feelings that create your actions, and it's your actions that create your outcome. So we then spend a bunch of time talking about what are some better stories that she could tell herself. And in actual fact, when we dived into it, we realized that she'd just come back from a 3-week break over Christmas and New Year. The momentum was starting to build into the practice. We created stories that she's really good at doing difficult things. We created stories in around her ability to be able to implement and make changes. And all of these stories here, the end result of those new stories or belief systems is that she was feeling a lot more motivated. She was able to produce a great action list as well and start to implement on that. And that action list, when she follows through with it, will end up with the result of the practice being busy again, okay? So belief systems that supported the outcome there as well. So we need to become detectives at finding out what stories are we telling ourselves. And as I finished off that session with her yesterday, I wanted to remind her that the only difference we can have almost anything that we want in life. And I believe that we can have anything that our heart tells us, any desire that, because I believe desires, a desire that sits in our heart there too, is something that's been given to us. And I don't think that the universe gives us a desire that we can't manifest. Now, I don't mean manifest by just sitting there, legs crossed, fingers in lotus position there too, and just, saying, I believe that we're able to manifest it through putting in the right actions and beliefs and thoughts and motivations and all those things, actually doing things. But if we have a desire inside us, that the only thing that stops us from getting there is making sure that we have the right narratives. What are the right stories that fuel that? Okay. And then when we can align those stories, then coming after those stories, those beliefs will be the feelings, the motivation, which will drive the action and therefore the results. So being self-aware. So maybe that's something for you that, in 2024, what do you believe is true that might not be? What are the stories that you have that you think are facts that may actually be facts? Now, number 8, let me get even more practical here as well. And that is the community influencer members that are knocking it out of the park are good at planning and using their time. They understand that we all have access to the same 24 hours a day and that there's 2 ways that they can use time. One is they can look at time as if it controls them, okay? And for people that feel this way, there's never enough hours in the day. There's never enough weeks. There's never enough holidays. There's never enough of time as well. They feel overwhelmed, like there's more jobs than there is time. Now, the second way that you can look at this is that you control time. You're the one who decides where you invest your time. Now, too many chiropractors have flat out not developed the skill of time management. Now, let me be clear. Time management is absolutely a skill. Now, while it comes naturally to some of you, okay, for most of us, it doesn't. Think of it like learning to swim. We don't expect that we can throw our kids in the pool and they just know how to swim. We have to teach them how to swim. Now, are some people natural swimmers? Some people are, but I don't think we want to be throwing our kids into the pool there too. And most people certainly aren't natural when it comes to good planning and good use of time. But it is a learnable skill, okay? There are books that you can read. There are courses that you can take. And I believe that very few things will pay dividends like you understanding how to really use your time and time management. Now, many of you have a story inside of your mind that you're not disciplined and you lack motivation, when the truth of the matter is you just have really lousy time management skills. You need to learn how to do that, okay? As I said, most people aren't naturally gifted in this. Now, when you commit to mastery, and maybe this is one of the things that you get from this episode, I'm going to get really good at planning and using my time. I'm going to get good at sticking to a diary and managing that. Very few people who achieve amazing things in their life don't have a plan, don't have it written out. Okay, they do. A couple of weeks ago, community influencer members sat down and said, what are our quarterly 1 objectives? In order to answer that question, we had to decide what are our end of year objectives. We planned it out. We have a plan. We move forward. You do not build a house without a plan. You cannot have a thriving life and practice without a plan as well. Now, this means you're going to get good at planning and get good at using your time as well. Great skill sets to have as well. The community influencer members that are really, really doing extraordinary things too also have a passion or a vision for growing the practice that's bigger than just them. It's not just about more income, which is why I often, even at the start of this podcast, I talk about the importance of impact, income, and enjoyment. Those 3 things need to go all together. And when you're missing any one of those, we're going to have a very unfulfilled life, okay? If we're having tremendous impact in our community and we're making bucket loads of cash, but it's not enjoyable, it's not sustainable. Okay, trust me, I've been there for it as well. But if it's enjoyable and you're having impact and you're not making any money, that sucks as well. So we need to make sure that we have all of this. And one of the ways that helps us pull all of this off is making sure that we have a vision, a mission that's bigger than just our practice. Now, I like to look at these in 2 different ways. I'm going to give you some extrinsic examples and intrinsic, and I'll share mine with you here as well. A big shift happened with me when I had a patient called Teresa come into me. Now, Teresa, I've told this story before, but if you're new to the podcast, I'm going to tell it again. Teresa came to me as a result of a mail drop that I did. Now, this is when I just started to kind of get into some external marketing. I built my practice in one specific way. We were very, very busy and those things stopped working. And I started to try some external marketing, of which one of the early things I tried was a mail drop. So Teresa ends up in my practice there too, and she has migraine headaches. But you notice many of our patients, they come in from migraine headaches, or they say they have migraines. They don't have migraines. They just have bad headaches. But Teresa had the real deal. And so, the whole thing, the photophobia, shut herself in a dark room, the vomiting, that sort of stuff there. And when she had the migraines, on average, they would last about 3 days. And she would get probably 2 of these a fortnight, sometimes more. Now, this had meant that she'd found it virtually impossible to work. No medication had made a difference, and she'd been on a whole bunch of different bits and pieces. She had a marriage breakdown because of them, and she was a single mum raising a child. And there were some interesting things about her case, but the one thing that really stood out for me is as I was chatting with Teresa and all the different things that she had tried, she said to me, I didn't know that chiropractic could help me. And it wasn't until I got your letterbox drop, because that particular focus of that letterbox drop was in around headaches and migraine and how chiropractic could help. Now, something stunned me at that moment, and that was, here's a woman who'd had these migraine headaches for the 2 decades beforehand, had tried the most outrageous different things there too, and not once has she considered chiropractic. So it wasn't that she was saying, I don't want to try chiropractic because chiropractors suck and I hate them or they're dangerous. She'd never thought that this was an option until I explained it inside of this flyer here, and she said, that makes sense, I'm going to go get checked. Now, Teresa, like many of the patients that we see, ended up getting wonderful results with chiropractic, and her life changed. And it was at that stage there that I realized that for me, that I had to be going out there and trying to find people like Teresa. It was unfair for me to have this knowledge and not try to share it. And my marketing became less about me trying to grow my practice and more about me trying to find people like Teresa. And this is still very much the motivation that helps me inside of this podcast right now, because the better I can help you with your messaging and your broadcast, your conversion, retention, and your systems and your leadership, the more you're able to find and help people like Teresa. There are only so many Teresas I can help myself, but now I have thousands of chiropractors that listen to this, hundreds that I coach on a weekly basis there as well, that are all finding Teresa. So it's still a motivation for me, and she is one of those extrinsic motivators that keeps me on track when I have to do things, those difficult things, difficult conversations. I always go back to thinking about Teresa. Now, the other thing I often think about too is I often think back to a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, and he has a little quote, a paragraph that's called "The Man in the Arena" as well. And I want to read that out to you. And this is one of the very strong intrinsic motivators for me as well. So I'll read this and I'll talk about how this is a motivator for me. He says, it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without shortcoming, but who actually does strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows the end of triumph and high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Now, I turned 49 this year, so 50 on 2nd of January next year, for those of you that want to send me a birthday wish as well. And I begin now and have over the last few years to think more about this next stage of my life. And one of my greatest fears is being one of those people who is on their deathbed and who knows at the end of triumph, okay, that if he fails, at least I failed while daring greatly. So I don't want to be one of those people that gets there and thinks, I wish I had have just tried. And so as my heart tries to express what wants to come through it, whether it be in different coaching and expansion and all those things in different areas of my life there too, I don't want to die with my music inside me. It's an intrinsic motivator to get all of this out of me and share it with the world. Now, does it fail? It often does, okay? But I'd rather try something and fail than not try it at all. And so inside of me, I have those two things. I think about Teresa and wanting to help more Teresas. And I also think about you guys as chiropractors and the difference I've been able to make. But really, it continues to come back to Teresa for me as well. And then that is also supported by this idea of the fear, the terror, the horror I have of not wanting to die with my music inside of me. And so for many of us, we need to spend some time working out what is the bigger why for us. Now, I created a short little video recently with this, but I want to touch on a couple of things. These have been evolving stories for me. They're not things that kind of happened, at a click of a fingers that allowed me to develop them. With time and with reading books and, a lot of this work with this Theodore Roosevelt came from a Brené Brown book called Daring Greatly. She helped to really clarify a lot of this, intrinsic motivation for me. And so there are some people when it comes to this purpose and mission and vision and stuff that it drops down on them. They are born with it. And I really admire those. I envy them in some ways. And, these are the people that write the amazing books and they sell thousands of those books. But what often happens is we compare ourselves to those people and we feel freaking terrible because our mission doesn't come across like that too. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about having contextual purpose. Like that is, what is the purpose in around this thing that I'm doing right now? And he also talks about that our purpose changes. So when he was inside the concentration camps, his purpose was to survive so he could rewrite his book, Man's Search with Meaning. But once that was out and published, he needed to create a new purpose. And so in my life, the purpose continues to evolve. And so if you found that yours is evolving or you can't find it, it's okay to have a purpose for now. It doesn't have to be, and it's often not this, lightning bolt moment that stays with you that will be your guiding North Star for the rest of your life. Just look for what is it that guides you right now as well. So having a passion, a vision for growth of your life and your practice that's beyond just you is important as well. Now, the final one that I want to share about, the lesson that I've learned from those chiropractors inside of Community Influence that are doing it really great is they have a wonderful sense of self-compassion and self-kindness. And this has been a great lesson for me. It's a characteristic that allows them to do all of the things that I've just spoken about beforehand and not burn down the house in the process. Now, I have several times in my life, and even just recently at Christmas again, worked myself into burnout to some degree, where when I take some time off, my body crashes. My nervous system gets stuck in that fight flight. And again, this happens because of stories that I have in around levels of worthiness being related to my production. The more that I can produce, whether it's patients seen, income generated, podcast listens, all those sorts of things, I link that to a level of self-worthiness and lovability. Now, I know that that is crazy, that more podcast downloads doesn't make me more worthy as a human being. Adjusting more patients doesn't make me more worthy as a chiropractor or as a human being as well. But these are old stories that pop back up and they're invisible for a lot of the time there. And I was chatting with my coach about it the other day. I'm having a break next week. I'm going off for a week as both Lauren and Edison, my middle child there too, are doing the Syntropy Adjusting seminar. And I was talking to my coach because it's a shortened week for me about all the things that I needed to get done while I was away. And the vision that I was looking into the future for, the lens that I was looking through was all about production, what needed to be done. And then we had a really wonderful and very enlightening conversation about what if the lens that I was looking through was one of self-kindness and compassion. So right up the top, when I was looking towards what I want to do over this week, I asked myself the question of what would be kindest? What would be kindest for myself, as well as what would allow me to produce? Then I came up with very different kind of plan as well. Now, I'm running a 90-day experiment, and I hope to continue this experiment on. And at this stage, I'm a kind of week into it as well. But instead of me sitting down at the start of the week and just asking about what do I need to produce this week, but I ask myself that same question. But before I do that is how can I be kind to myself? Now, interestingly, in the process of doing this, and I'm only 1 week into it, my production hasn't decreased at all. In fact, if anything, it's increased. Now, who would have thought that, okay? Because the kinder I am to myself, the healthier I am. The healthier I am, the more creative I am. The healthier I am, the more I can actually produce as well. And this is something that I notice in community influencer members, those that have a great level of self-compassion and kindness, okay, are the ones that ultimately build the most sustainable, thriving practices and life as well. So there's 10 characteristics. Let me just review those as we finish up as well. And maybe you can think about where there are opportunities for growth and learning for you as well. Is it about implementing quickly? Okay. Do you need to let go of perfection? Is there about changing the story that you have in around failure? And do you need to develop a resilience to failure as well? Is it about being more open to feedback and being coachable by, those people that are important to you? Do you need to narrow your focus? Are there just too many things on your plate? Are you trying to spin too many plates in the air? And how can you compress that into focus on no more than 3 things as well? Is it about doing difficult things? Have you shied away from doing difficult things because they're difficult? And is that the skill set that you need to develop this year as well? Could it be about self-awareness and looking at the stories? What are the stories that you're telling yourself about, whether you can or can't have a thriving practice in life, what you can earn and can't earn, what people will or won't pay for? These are all just stories as well. Is it that you need to improve your planning and the use of your time? Is that going to be the key that will unlock a really thriving practice and life as well? Or do you need to spend some time in around really looking at a bigger why? Okay, what is the why more than just impact and income and enjoyment? Is there a bigger why for you as well, both intrinsic and extrinsic? And then is it you, like me, in 2024, the thing that I need to really work on is self-compassion, adding a little bit of kindness in there as well. I think will not only help me have a more thriving life, but I think it will really help my production as well. So these are 10 things that I've learned in the last 5 years of coaching and hundreds of chiropractors and working indirectly with tens of thousands through the podcast, through my emails and through the workshops that I've run as well. So my hope is that maybe one or several of these kind of triggers something in you that helps you to have a more thriving year this year. As always, folks, thanks for all that you do. Thanks for the lives that you save. Thanks for being on this journey here with me. I look forward to putting together another 350 episodes for you. Till next time, stay well. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspike.com/join. That's anguspike.com/join. I'd love to see you there.